can never make it. Help me, Lord. Please. I promise not to try and kill myself anymore. Save me, and I swear I'll be a better father. I'll be a better man. I'll be a better everything. All I ask is, make me a better swimmer. Oh, God. I can't do this to Julie. We can't do this to Julie. Oh, God. Let me live, and I promise to obey every one of the 10 commandments. I shall not kill. I shall not commit adultery. I shall not. I'll learn the 10 commandments, and then I'll obey every one of them. Just get me back to the beach. I'll be honest in business. I promise not to sell lakeside lots unless there's a lake around. I want to see another sunrise. I want to see another sunset. It was a mistake, God. I never really wanted to kill myself. I just wanted to get your attention. Help me make it. I'll give you 50% of everything I make. 50%, God. I want to point out that nobody gives 50%. I'm talking gross, God. I think I'm going to make it. You won't regret this, Lord. I'll obey every commandment. I'll see my parents more often. No more cheating in business once I get rid of those 9 acres in the desert. And I'm going to start donating that 10% right away. I know I said 50%, Lord, but 10% to start. If you don't want your 10%, then don't take it. I know it was you that saved me, but it was also you that made me sick.
Boker Tov, everyone, and quite frankly, one of my favorite performances by Burt Reynolds. Everybody always thinks of Deliverance, but I always remember this scene, him negotiating with God as he's trying to save his life and swim to shore, and as he gets closer and closer, he lowers the stakes each and every time. A wonderful comedic scene, and one that captures a great truth, which is that when we negotiate with God, we tend to want to negotiate for ourselves when we are in extremis, or we're in danger, or we feel that something is at risk, or something that we personally value is at risk, a loved one or our career or something like that. I think it's a good place to start for our Torah portion this week, which is Vayeira, another Genesis portion full of, as I've been saying lately, a lot of big ideas. Now, the biggest, of course, is the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, which is so critical to our self-understanding and reflecting on the nature of sacrifice and total devotion, and when do we cross the line to fanaticism. Great stuff there, but we talk about that a lot, so I want to talk about some of the other things. Another great idea that appears in our Torah portion is the moment when Abraham negotiates with God. And this is one of the most, I think, uniquely Jewish moments in the entire Torah. And it's worth revisiting. It's a story we should all know. So, at the very beginning of our Torah portion, what happens is that Abraham is sitting outside his tent. Apparently, at least if chapter 17 follows up immediately chapter 18. Abraham has just circumcised himself. Now he's 99 years old, so you can only imagine that this was a stressful experience. And he did it to himself, and self-surgery is never something I'm going to recommend to anybody. But in any case, so Abraham is sitting out in front of his tent, as I like to imagine him going, "Oi, oi, that hurts, oi." And then, lo and behold, three strangers, three wayfarers, three travelers pass by the encampment. Now, this immediately appears as a exemplar of Abraham showing hospitality. And this is not only important in and of itself, but it's also going to serve later in the Torah portion to serve as a contrast to the behavior of his nephew Lot, who is now living in the city of Sodom, and his strange and perverted form of hospitality. We are meant to see these two stories and see two types of people in them. But in any case, Abraham shows exceptional hospitality. It's always a risk to invite strangers in the Bronze Age. Who knows who these people are? Could they be bandits, killers? Who knows? Anyway, he invites these three strangers over. He shows not only exemplary hospitality, but exaggerated hospitality. He washes their feet and brings them water, but then he has the encampment cook them an entire meal. And so it's the beginning of what I like to call relentless hospitality, Jewish kind of over-the-top hospitality. Anyway, it turns out, lo and behold, he didn't realize this at the time, is that he's talking to what appear to be three angels. Often in the Hebrew Bible, angels do not manifest themselves in a way that is obvious, but rather they seem ordinary on the initial encounter and then only become extraordinary at a certain moment of realization. And that is, in this case, they start predicting Sarah having a child and giving birth, which is so outlandish that Sarah laughs at the idea. Which then leads to the name of her son, Yitzhak, or laughter, or laughing boy is the way I like to translate it. So anyway, they reveal themselves to be angels, and then they set off for the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the angels reveal that their intention is to destroy the city, and this sets up the moment where Abraham pauses on the road to Sodom and Gomorrah to not only talk to God, but to negotiate with God. Not exactly like Burt Reynolds. In this particular case, Abraham is not negotiating for himself. It's not that he is at risk. And it's not even that he perceives that anybody he loves is at risk, but rather he's arguing on behalf of strangers. Now, this is the first of the extraordinary aspects of all of this, but maybe I've failed to allude to the fact that Abraham is arguing with God. He's negotiating with God in a way that you and I can't possibly imagine. And the back and forth play is absolutely fabulous. Abraham always begins with a personally humbling, obsequious, who am I, God? I'm nothing but dust and ashes, but, you're the judge of heaven and earth. Shouldn't you judge justly? He's actually questioning God's judgment. And then he proposes maybe a way of criteria for judging whether mass destruction is really the right path. And he suggests that maybe if you find 50 righteous people there, that's enough to spare the entire city. And God agrees and says, okay, if I find 50 righteous people, I won't destroy the city. And then Abraham continues to handle or negotiate with God till he gets God down to the number of 10. Of course, the famous number in Jewish tradition for a minyan, the essential number of people to make up representatives of the community. So if there are 10 righteous people in Sodom, God will not destroy the city. And at that point, Abraham backs off and says, so be it. And there's a wonderful phrase that says, and then Abraham returned to his place. Absolutely wonderful, right? Because he'd stepped beyond his place for that entire negotiation. Who is he to argue with God? But he does. And this establishes the great Jewish tradition of not just having blind faith, of not just accepting what's happening as God's will or God's intention, but rather stopping to think, is there a better way? Could this play out differently? Why does it have to be this way? And this establishes a long tradition in Judaism that truly righteous people can, in fact, argue with God. We see it with Moses. We see quite a number of the prophets articulate their feelings that God is going overboard on some of the things that have been revealed to them, and they will argue with God. And famously, the interpretation of being a prophet is someone who will speak to people on behalf of God, but will speak to God on behalf of people, right? So someone who stands with enough justification, enough righteousness to be able to make a case both ways. Not that they'll be listened to, but that is the argument. And this tradition continues on post-biblically. One of my favorite characters from the Hasidic tradition is Rabbi Yitzhak Levi of Berdichev, who is known as the Satan of God. The word Satan means adversary. So the adversary of God. And there are many, many stories in which Rabbi Levi Yitzhak argues with God and says, this isn't really just. Well, why do you allow this to happen? And demanding that God behave in a more just fashion. On the face of it, this is ridiculous. Who are we to question the author of all things? What our tradition argues is the creator of each of us. Doesn't God have absolute latitude to do whatever he wants to? And who is to question him? Turns out we are. We're entitled to reflect. And so Jewish theology is not simply about obedience. Obedience is important. Being willing to follow the lead given us is very important, especially when it comes to something as important as divinity or something as powerful as divinity. But we're also entitled to question. And that's the key, and it becomes the basis for what so many people I work with who want to convert to Judaism will say to me. What they love about Judaism is that we are a faith of questioning, that the questions we ask often are more important than the answers we come up with. And I do think, at least in the Western religious tradition, that makes us quite unique. It's also the case, and I think there's an important midrash that goes with this. It's also the case that questioning allows us to think through and maybe come to a deeper understanding in ourselves. So a famous midrash told about the issue of Sodom and Gomorrah, which, by the way, while in Christian tradition, they are condemned for presumed homosexuality. There's some elements in the Genesis text that suggest that. Really, in Jewish tradition, starting with the prophet Ezekiel, the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is their lack of hospitality and their lack of compassion for strangers. And this theme comes up again and again and again in Jewish tradition. So wherever you may be on the question of sexual mores, Sodom and Gomorrah, at least from a Jewish perspective, is not an exemplar for us. It's not a place we go to justify the condemnation of any particular sexual lifestyle. What Jewish tradition has always been concerned about was their parsimony, their brutality towards strangers, their inhospitality that is in marked contrast with Abraham, our father. And those are the things that come up. In any case, so the story goes that there was at least one righteous soul in Sodom, and that he would go around on a regular basis and try and convince the people that they needed to be nicer, more compassionate, kinder, and they wouldn't listen to him. And he would try again and again, and to the point where it became clear that he was just talking to himself, talking to a wall. And then finally, at one point, he ends up in the town square and he's just screaming. He's just yelling. He's just shouting incomprehensibly. And finally, one of the people who has been observing him for a long time comes up to him and says, "Why are you shouting? Why are you making all this noise? Do you think that's going to persuade us to be different than we are?" And he says, "No, it's not that I'm trying to get you to be different. It's me trying to make sure that you don't change me." And sometimes that's what all a prophet is doing. Sometimes a true prophet cannot change the course of events, cannot change the mind of people or change the mind of God. But at least they have registered their opinion, their dissent, their position publicly. And sometimes that's all we can do, but it's absolutely necessary. We have to do. That's what our ancestor Abraham did, and he set an example for all of us. So, thank you for listening to this little discussion about arguing with God, and always, always keep those negotiating skills ready. Who knows when they might prove to be useful? So, this is our taste of Torah for this week, and we are now completing the cycle. I've recorded an entire year's worth of commentary on our Torah portions, so I'm going to be starting over next week with Vayeira, but fortunately for us, almost all Torah portions allow for multiple subjects to be explored and multiple interpretations, and most important of all, I get to keep talking. So I'm going to pick up Vayeira, and we'll pick a different topic from what I talked about last year, so that we can unfold new dimensions of Torah as we go forward. Thank you all. Toda Rabbah, Lehitraot. We'll see you all soon.